The Labrador retriever remained motionless in the corridor, shaking violently as his gaze fixed on the nursery entrance. When Claire finally understood what had frozen her faithful companion in sheer terror, her world tilted on its axis. For nearly a month, Bailey had been exhibiting bizarre behavior around Baby, Sophia refusing to step inside her room, hiding under tables, his formerly cheerful demeanor replaced by something that resembled pure dread. Claire's husband had begun using words like resentful and unpredictable. They'd even researched rehoming options for Bailey. One evening, Claire heard a noise that made her heart seize a deep, guttural snarl emerging from the shadows. She discovered Bailey in the passageway, every fiber rigid, staring into Sophia's room with an intensity that seemed almost unhinged. What she uncovered in that instant was so staggering. It transformed everything they believed about loyalty and sacrifice. The exhaustion of new parenthood. Claire hadn't experienced genuine rest in nearly 4 weeks. The fatigue etched itself into her features, creating hollows beneath her eyes and making her movements clumsy and hesitant. She'd fumble objects, bottles, cloths, her phone, her hands trembling from the endless loop of feeding, changing, comforting, repeating. The nights had morphed into a war zone where she battled against her own deteriorating body, frantic to keep her newborn daughter protected and nourished. "I can't sustain this," she breathed one morning, her voice splintering as she stood in the kitchen, staring at emptiness. Her husband Ryan approached from behind, his own face lined with concern. "You need to rest," he said softly, but Claire barely registered his words. She was observing Bailey through the doorway. The yellow Labrador sat compressed against the distant wall, his eyes focused on the baby monitor, his entire frame taut. "Something's not right with him," Claire said, not for the first occasion. "He won't approach her room. He won't even glance at Sophia without quivering." Ryan's expression hardened. "Claire, I think we need to seriously consider." "Don't." Her tone emerged harsher than she meant. "Don't say it. He's displaying hostile behavior. Possessive." "What? If he attacks when we're distracted?" Claire felt her chest constrict. Bailey had been her companion for 6 years. Her mother had gifted him to her shortly before passing away. The dog had guided her through mourning, through engagement, through the anxious months of expecting. And now Ryan wanted her to believe Bailey posed a danger to their daughter. "He's not hostile," she maintained, but her voice faltered, because truthfully she couldn't comprehend Bailey's conduct either. The way he'd linger near the nursery entrance but refuse to cross the threshold. The way he'd whine when Sophia wailed, retreating instead of approaching. The way his eyes held something that appeared disturbingly like panic. "We must prioritize Lily," Ryan said quietly. "If something occurred, and we disregarded the red flags." Claire closed her eyes. The burden of new motherhood compressed down on her chest until she could scarcely breathe. She was so depleted, so weary of anxiety, of questioning every choice, of feeling inadequate at everything. The breaking point. The crisis arrived on a Wednesday night. Claire was in the nursery, positioning Sophia in her bassinet after nursing. Bailey materialized in the doorway, his customary location. But this occasion, he didn't merely observe. He snarled low and relentless, his fur bristling. "Bailey, enough!" Claire exploded, her patience finally disintegrating. She was functioning on 90 minutes of sleep. Her body throbbed. Her daughter had been screaming for hours with colic, and now her dog was behaving like some feral creature. Bailey didn't budge. His focus wasn't on Claire. It was locked on the bassinet, on something Claire couldn't perceive. "Leave, now," she advanced toward him, her hands quaking with frustration and rage. "I'm serious, Bailey. Get out." The dog withdrew, but gradually, unwillingly, his stare never departing the nursery. That evening, Claire sat at the kitchen counter with Ryan, tears cascading down her face. "All right," she murmured. "Contact your brother. Asked if he'll accept him." Ryan extended across the counter, grasping her hand. Neither of them observed that Bailey hadn't relocated to his typical resting place near the fireplace. He was in the corridor again, sprawled flat on the floor, his nose directed toward the nursery door. every muscle wound with tension. The sleepless night, Claire couldn't rest. Remorse consumed her insides, blending with the exhaustion until she felt physically sick. She'd made the choice Bailey would depart in the morning. She attempted to convince herself it was the correct decision, the prudent decision, but the notion of witnessing him leave, of severing that final link to her mother, made her want to collapse. At 2:30 in the morning, she heard it, that sound that would echo in her nightmares for years ahead. A low, rumbling snarl that raised every hair on her neck. Claire threw aside the covers and rushed into the corridor. Bailey was there, positioned exactly as she'd seen him earlier, but now his body was convulsing so intensely she could hear his collar jingling. "Bailey," her voice emerged barely audible. The dog's head rotated slightly toward her, and in his eyes she witnessed something that made her stomach plummet. Not hostility, not resentment, pure instinctual terror. Claire's hand located the switch. The gentle illumination flooded the nursery. Sophia sleeping soundly in her bassinet, her chest rising and falling with each delicate breath. Everything appeared normal, perfect, secure, except for the blanket, the soft pink receiving blanket Claire had arranged around. Sophia's legs was shifting not from the baby's movements. Sophia was completely motionless, lost in slumber. The blanket was undulating on its own, a subtle rippling motion near the bottom of the bassinet. The horrifying discovery, time seemed to crystallize. Claire's logical mind attempted to provide explanations there. Current from the vent, her imagination, exhaustion creating illusions. But her body understood. Her body recognized before her brain could process, flooding adrenaline through her system, propelling her legs forward. Even as her mind screamed that this couldn't be real, she traversed the nursery in 3 strides. Her hands descended and seized the edge of the blanket. In one rapid motion, she ripped it away. The snake was compact, barely 2 feet in length, its tan and russet scales shimmering in the dim light. It had wrapped itself near Sophia's legs, drawn to the warmth of the infant's body. A timber rattlesnake, venomous, its diamond-shaped head turned toward Claire's abrupt movement, and for one terrible instant she saw its mouth part slightly, exposing those curved fangs. Claire's scream shattered through the house. She grabbed Sophia into her arms so rapidly she nearly lost balance, stumbling away from the bassinet as the snake coiled down to the floor. Ryan exploded into the room, and the following minutes became a chaos of terror. Ryan containing the snake under a storage bin, Claire dialing emergency services with trembling fingers, both of them examining Sophia's tiny body for any indication of a bite, any mark that would signify they were already too late. "There's nothing," Ryan kept repeating, his voice elevated with barely restrained panic. "I don't see anything, Claire. I don't see anything." The aftermath. The emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes. They inspected Sophia meticulously under bright lights, checking every centimeter of her pristine skin. Claire stood clutching her daughter, unable to halt the tears streaming down her face, unable to stop visualizing what could have occurred, what nearly occurred. "She's unharmed," the paramedic finally declared, and Claire felt her knees nearly collapse with relief. "No bites, no signs of envenomation. You were extraordinarily fortunate." A wildlife specialist extracted the snake, explaining how timber rattlesnakes occasionally infiltrated homes through tiny openings, attracted by warmth and the presence of rodents. "They're typically not combative," he said, carefully securing the snake in a transport container. "But when they're trapped or startled, or when they perceive danger," he didn't need to complete the statement. Later, after everyone had departed, after Sophia had been examined and re-examined and finally settled back into sleep, Claire found Bailey. He was still in the corridor, pressed against the wall, his body trembling. When she approached, he gazed up at her with those same terrified eyes. And suddenly, everything crystallized. The way he'd started behaving strangely the day they brought Sophia home, because that's when the snake must have entered. The way he'd refused to enter the nursery because he could detect the danger, but was too frightened to confront it alone. The way he'd stationed himself as near as possible to the doorway, standing sentinel despite his fear. The way he'd growled, attempting to warn her in the only language he possessed. He hadn't been resentful. He hadn't been hostile. He'd been terrified and protective simultaneously, caught between his impulse to guard his family and his natural fear of a predator he couldn't overcome. "Oh, Bailey," Claire whispered, collapsing to her knees beside him. The dog whimpered, pressing his head against her chest, and she felt his whole body shaking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so profoundly sorry." She embraced him there in the corridor, weeping into his yellow fur, contemplating how close they'd come to sending him away, how close they'd come to catastrophe. Understanding protection, not fortunate protected. Ryan came to settle beside them, his hand resting on Bailey's head. "He knew," he said quietly. "The entire time, he knew." Claire nodded, unable to articulate. She reflected on all those nights Bailey had refused to abandon his station in the corridor. All those hours he'd stood watch, observing, waiting, attempting to alert them in the only method he could. And they'd labeled him resentful, dangerous. They'd planned to remove him. "I almost surrendered you," Claire whispered to Bailey, her voice fragmenting. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't comprehend." The following morning, Claire sat in the nursery with Sophia in her arms and Bailey pressed against her side. She'd spent the night inspecting every corner, every crevice, every possible entry point. The wildlife specialist had sealed the opening the snake likely used, a small gap near the foundation. But Claire knew it would be weeks before she felt secure again. Bailey's head rested on her lap, his eyes finally closed in exhausted slumber. His vigil was complete. He'd kept his family safe, and now he could rest. "You're never leaving," Claire told him softly, stroking his ears. "Never. Do you understand me? Your family. You've always been family." Ryan stood in the doorway observing them. "Your mother knew what she was doing," he said quietly, "giving you Bailey." Claire looked down at the dog at his peaceful sleeping face and felt fresh tears slip down her cheeks. Her mother had always said Bailey was extraordinary, that he'd protect her when she couldn't anymore. She'd thought she meant emotional support, companionship. She'd never imagined she meant this literally, that Bailey would one day position himself between her daughter and death, maintaining his ground despite his fear. The lesson in fear and courage. That day, Claire contacted Ryan's brother and informed him they wouldn't need his help with Bailey after all. She called her friends, shared the story, heard their astonished silence on the other end of the line. She posted the wildlife specialist's contact information in the community forum, warning other parents about inspecting their homes carefully. But mostly she just remained close to her family, all of them, and tried to forgive herself for doubting the one who'd never doubted his purpose. Sometimes the boundary between survival and tragedy is guarded, not by what we anticipate but by what we misinterpret. Sometimes the guardian angel watching over our most precious treasure wears fur and communicates in languages we fail to recognize until it's almost too late. True protection doesn't always appear courageous. Sometimes it appears as fear, the kind of fear that maintains its position regardless, that refuses to desert its post even when every instinct demands retreat. Bailey hadn't failed to be courageous. He'd been courageous in spite of his terror, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you and opened your eyes to the silent protectors in your own life, share it with others. Comment your reflections, because sometimes the ones we're ready to dismiss are the very ones keeping us safe. If this story touched your heart, please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you in the next story.